Hey everyone, welcome to the fifth and final episode of the JMU X Labs AR Social Media Filter Pop-Up. In this episode, we're going to be introducing the concept of animations, and we're going to be creating one of those question and answer filters that you see all over Instagram, where there's a little floating box above your head, and then there's a question and it randomizes an answer afterward. And finally, we're going to actually be publishing our filters onto Instagram and Facebook, so at the end of this pop-up, you'll be able to share them with your friends once you're done. Let's start this filter off with a little throwback to the first episode. Let's go ahead and add our white JMU X Labs logo to the bottom of the filter again. If you want a challenge, go ahead and pause this video and see if you can do it on your own. But if not, I'll go ahead and show you how to do it again as well. To start off, we're going to go back to focal distance, right click, add, and click plane. And this will give us our little rectangle again. Now, we can move it back down to the bottom, which we want to do, and we can add a material. Here we have our material down here, which we can go ahead and rename logo material. And now we can go over to texture. We can go to choose file. We can select our logo again. And now we have our logo. If we go back up to plain, which we can also go ahead and rename logo at this point. We can go ahead and resize it so we make it a little bit less squished. And since it's too big on our phone right here, we'll go ahead and downsize the whole thing and move it down a little bit more. And there you have it. For this filter, we're going to want a little box that follows our head as we're moving around. So for that, we're going to need to add a face tracker to our scene. To do that, we can go to right click, focal distance, add, and face tracker right at the top. So here we have our face tracker, which is following where we're going. But now we're going to need our two little boxes at the top. So to do that, we can go to Face Tracker, Add, and we'll add a plane. So if we bring this up, you can now see that this little box follows my head wherever it goes. We can go ahead and add a second box because we're going to need one for the question and one for the answer. We can either go back to Face Tracker and add another plane, or we can honestly just copy and paste that one. Then we'll go ahead and rename one question and one answer. For this example, the question I chose is what's the coolest place at JMU? However, it's super easy if you want to go ahead and substitute your own examples and change the question. Let's go ahead and add our image to the question plane. We can do this in the same way as adding material to the logo as we did before. So, let's go to our question. We can go down to materials and we'll create a new material. We can call this Q material for question, and we can choose our file. And let's see, here's our question, so let's go ahead and open it. Now, right now we can't see it on the actual preview. The reason why is because the question and answer are basically in the same location. The answer one is actually in front of the question. So if we just go ahead and swap those, we can now go ahead and see the question. One detail you might have noticed from that swap is now the question is actually indented in relationship to the answer. So, one way we can get around that and get them back on the same level is we just drag this question back up to the face tracker, and now they're the same. At the end of the day, it's not really going to matter which one's in front of the other for this filter because we're going to add some logic through the patches that's going to turn one off or the other off. Let's go ahead and add our images for the answer. Unlike the question, which is just one image that's static, we're going to want a bunch of different images that flash one after the other. So to do that, we can add an animation. If we come down to Add Asset, we can click and we can add an animation sequence. That'll give us a new folder down here. If we click on this animation sequence, we can go ahead and rename this something like, oops, not delete. We can rename it Answer. And we can add some files. So if we go to choose file, we can actually select multiple ones to import. So I'm going to hold shift and click all the way down here, and this will get me all my locations on JMU's campus. You can click open, and it'll take a second to load. Now again, we can't see the animation right now because the question is in front of the answer. So we can go back to our face tracker and do that same swapping thing we did earlier. Alright, so now they're nested, and we're going to drag this back out so they're on the same level. Now, again, currently, there's nothing displayed on the answer because we still have to add a material for it. So, you can go back to Materials, select, We're going to create a new material. And let's rename this A material. And we can go ahead and for texture, if we click this little drop down menu over here, we have our little answer animation sequence right here. So if we click this, we now have our flashing images. Now, right now the images are flashing really fast, so let's go ahead and slow this down. If we go back down to our animation sequence and click answer, we can actually go down here to the frames per second and we can make this smaller. So let's go down to maybe 15. And even that's still a little bit fast, so let's go down to maybe 7. Yeah, so now we can see all the locations as they're flashing by. They're fast enough where we can get through them all, but they're slow enough where we can kind of read them. So now we have the questions and the answer images set up on our filter. However, we still have a problem because we can't really switch between the question and the answer. The way we can get around this is by triggering the switch using some kind of event. In episode 3, we triggered things using a head nod. In this case though, let's trigger this using a tap on the screen. If we go down to our patch editor down here, we can right click and we can add a screen tap. Now again, this screen tap doesn't actually mean anything on its own. It doesn't mean on or off, it just is a neutral thing. So we need to add a switch as well. In this case, we're going to want a screen tap to either turn one layer on or one layer off. So we're going to need to drag the gesture state to this flip. Now let's grab our question and answer. If we go over to our question, there's actually a little arrow over here next to this visible category. If we click it, this will actually trigger if the layer is visible or not. And we can do the same thing with the answer over here. Now, the problem is right now, they're kind of set on the same page. So if we were to connect the switch to both of these, they're either going to both turn on or both turn off at the same time, which we don't want. We want them to be alternating, so it's one or the other. So to get around that, we can also add one more patch. This one is called not. What the not does is it basically inverts whatever signal it's getting. So let's say it's getting a signal to turn on. This not part is actually going to change it and turn it to off. So we can drag this and connect these. And finally we can drag the switch to the answer. So as you can see, now only one is visible. If we come up here to our little box, as you can see I have this little directional arrow thing, which we can't use to click. But if we go to these little 3 lines right here, we can click that and click Simulate Touch. And now when I touch it, they switch. For the last part of this filter, we're going to need to add some patches to make the answer actually stop at 1 at random. Because as of now, if we were to click it, it would just keep cycling through all the options and it would never stop. Now, this offset value here is the total number of seconds that the filter has been running for. And the total output over here of the offset, which is coming out through here, is going to be the amount of time since the last time the screen has been tapped. So let's say we want the filter to run for about 4 seconds before it stops and finds an answer. Let's add a new patch and it's going to be called less than. From here, we're going to connect our offset to our first input. And as you can see, on the less than, this value is smaller than this one. And this is because this output is then how long it's been since the last time we've tapped the screen. So if we go back to our little preview over here and we tap it, it's going to go back to 0. We tap it again, back to 0 again. So let's say we want to wait for 4 seconds, we can just change this to 4. Now what's happening is that as long as the number of seconds since the last tap is less than 4, a signal is going to travel through this patch. So next, let's add a patch that actually animates the loop. And we can do that by clicking and searching for loop animation. And that's going to play the animation in the answer repeatedly. And we can feed our output into here. And see right now, because our seconds is much greater than 4, this is going to be turned off, but if we tap, now it's going to be enabled. We're also going to need some kind of patch that generates a random number. This is so that the frames appear in a random order, and that the frame will actually stop on a certain one. To do that, we can double click, and we're going to search for random, and this will generate a random number. And we're going to feed this bottom output here into the randomize. Now for our range, we're basically going to generate values between 0 and the number of frames we have. So in this case, if we go back and look at our answer animation sequence, we have 9 different frames we can choose from, or 9 different answers. So for here, we're going to want to make the range from 0 to 9. When we're generating this random number, we also want it to be a whole number, not like 4.5 or 1.2 or something like that. So to do that, we have to add a round patch. And that's just going to round the value to the nearest integer. The last thing we have to do is actually feed this random number into the animation sequence so it can choose that random frame. To do that, we can go back to our animation sequence down here, and we can click this little arrow next to current frame. And now what's going to happen is, whatever we put down here is going to be the frame that's shown on screen. So as you can see, it's stopped looping through. So if I go to, let's say 2, it's going to change. So we can feed this through, and right now it's not looping because our value is greater, but now let's tap. And we're getting animations, but it's very slow. And the reason why that is because right now in our loop animation, the duration is that each clip is getting played for 1 second, which is a little bit too long since we're only doing stuff for 4 seconds. So let's bump this down to maybe 0.3, and let's try it again. Alright, that's still okay, but let's make it even faster. Let's do 0.1. And there you go, it lands on an answer. So now we have our fully working filter. As you might have noticed as we were clicking through those last test cases, we're actually no longer getting our alternating on and off of the cover and the question. I've sometimes noticed that's just happened as I've run the program for a long time, so I'm just going to go ahead and save my project and I'm going to reload it. Now I'm back after closing out my project and reloading it in Spark AR, and now everything is back to normal. So as you can see, if I go over here and I tap, I get my random images, and then it lands on one. Ooh, look at that. But if I go ahead and do it again, it'll switch back, and it should hopefully choose a different random one. There you go. So for one last step, I'm going to go back and adjust the sizes of the question and answer planes just so they're a little bit closer to the actual image size and dimensions. So I can go to question, go to the adjust, now I'll move it. It's a little bit tricky with both of them showing. Go back and get both of them. So now that we have our awesome filter effect, let's go ahead and actually share it on Instagram and Facebook. To do that, we have to go down to this little area over here, and while this is where we'll be testing it on our device, we're going to go one more down to upload and export. So from here, you might need to log into Facebook or Instagram if you haven't already. I've already done so everything's popping up fine. And we also have our file size. They have to be smaller than a certain amount in order to get published on certain platforms, but we are a-okay with our images right now. And we are publishing on a new effect, so we can go ahead and do that. And we can go ahead and click upload. So now that your filter is done exporting, you should be brought to a web page that looks something like this. From here, you can configure all the settings of your filter before it gets published. Let's start by giving it a name. For my filter, I'm going to call it JMU's Coolest Place. And down here, we just have the actual file from Spark AR Studio. Here I can choose which platform I want to publish to. In this case, I'll do Facebook and Instagram. And down here, it just designates who the owner and the publisher are. We also need to choose at least one category for our filter. For our case, we can do something like selfies because we're using the front-facing camera. We can also include keywords if we want to as well. We also can include demo videos and an icon for the filter. I went ahead and made a demo video in the Spark AR app, which you can also do on your own. I also went ahead and created an icon based on our cover image for the question. Let me go ahead and upload both of those. Once you're done, you should get something that looks like this. Now, when you first publish your effect, it won't be visible right away, and that's because Instagram and Facebook still have to actually review it to make sure it passes all of their community guidelines first. But if you want to share it before then, you can still come over here to share, and you can click either Facebook or Instagram, and you can access your filter that way. I actually came back to this filter a couple days later, and surprisingly, it actually wasn't accepted by the Spark AR policies. So if you do have some problem with your filter, you can go to this Review tab over here, and you can see what the issue is. In this case, my video contained text that's not integrated into the scene, meaning it was just static. One easy way we can fix this problem is by simply putting the XLabs logo on something that's moving or being tracked. So if we want, we can go over to our logo, and let's add that to our face tracker as well. Now we have it so the XLabs logo actually moves with us as we move our head around. And since it's attached to something that's moving and part of the scene, it should now be accepted by the community guidelines. Now I've gone in and I've updated my file with the newest version, and I've also gone and updated my demo video as well. And once I've made those changes and I feel good about them, I can go ahead and click submit again. I came back to check my filter a little bit later, and as you can see by this green icon, it is now visible and published. Let's hop over to Instagram to see it in action. Alright, so here I am on Instagram. Let's go ahead and search for my effect. If we scroll all the way over to the right, we can get to the Browse Effects option, and we're going to click on that. Now if we go to this little magnifying glass in the top right, we can click that, and we can search for my effect, which is JMU's Coolest, and it pops up. And we can go ahead and click on that. You see my little demo video. We can click try it. And now I have the filter. And with that, we have now reached the end of the AR social media filter pop-up. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys had fun and you learned some new things, and that you guys now have the tools to make some awesome filters for social media. We would love to see the filters that you guys have made through this pop-up. So feel free to share them with us at JMUXLabs on Instagram and JMUXLabs on Facebook. And if you guys really like this AR filter topic, consider signing up for our class next semester of the AR/VR course. If you have any feedback on this pop-up or you'd like to see more of this type of content, leave us a comment down below. And I guess that's everything. Stay tuned for more information about JMUXLabs pop-ups and events. Stay safe and see you all soon.